theme of our conversation today is Beneath the Surface, diving into the PAT learning experience. I'm Deb. I'm the head of education at Beckley Academy. We're here with Shirelle and Danielle, and we'll go ahead and start with Danielle. Danielle, I'd love if you would take a moment to introduce yourself.
Yeah, sure. Hi, everybody. Thanks for taking like a moment out of your day to come hang out with us and just check out this little webinar we're doing. So my name is Danielle. My primary identities are that I'm a lover, I'm a sister, I'm an auntie. That's my favorite one. My nephew's 5 years old. I'm a poet. I'm a Sufi. I'm an artist. And I love people for a living. So right now I'm getting to do that work in two primary shapings, which is as a psychotherapist, and as an educator. And my practice currently is as a psychedelic-assisted psychotherapist working with ketamine-assisted psychotherapy and with psychedelic integration. And then I talk about my work as being like full spectrum drug use, because I am also a trained harm reduction psychotherapist. So constantly talking about non-ordinary states of consciousness. I work a lot with spiritual emergence. So that also fits well with the psychedelic experience, and working with individuals and their spirituality. I have a private practice in Oakland, California. I've worked with Sage Integrative Health. I'm a supervising clinician both for Alchemy Community Therapy Center as well as for CIIS and soon for Naropa University. So there'll be a lot going on there. I know, new gig alert. and then I work here with Beckley, and I've been adoring my time here in educating and training folks for psychedelic assisted therapy. So that's kind of the nutshell. And I'm super stoked to meet you all.
Thank you. Yeah, you have so much experience. You have experience as a student in psychedelic assisted therapy training, as an educator of it, and as a practitioner of it. So I'd love if you could walk us through thinking back to when you first started practicing. What did you feel very prepared for after taking training, and what was surprising, or did you feel, less prepared for?
Great question. So save for the fact that I didn't feel prepared pretty much ever before beginning, is that when I first left grad school and was kind of doing my psychedelic assisted therapy trainings, I felt most prepared for the psychotherapy pieces because I have an MFT. I went to have a master's in counseling. So and most of my training or my education was around like Jungian depth analysis, psychoanalysis, as well as like systems oriented perspectives for social justice, psychotherapy. And so I was ready for that. I was ready to kind of like work with systems of oppression, colonialism, capitalism, white supremacy, and how to hold that in a container due to the school that I went to. And I felt prepared for the dynamic, the psychotherapeutic dynamic, working with things like shadow projections and projection identification, dreams, and counseling skills, right? But what I did not feel prepared for at all was how that applies to people who are not experiencing ordinary states of consciousness. In my program, we were actually taught in my psychotherapy program, we were taught to, refer out folks who were having a relationship or an experience with drugs, and almost like looked at it as like, if somebody is using a drug, then that is a problem and they should be seeing a substance use specialist, which isn't really a thing. And the drugs are very different from each other. So we weren't really talking much about that. I didn't feel prepared for working with, therefore, anything that could happen when people are engaging with these non-specific amplifiers, from a spiritual emergency or spiritual emergence, awakening, kundalini, anything, whatever shaping it takes in somebody's psyche or body based off of their cosmology. But I didn't know what to do with that. And when I was training, I went to the first ever psychedelic assisted therapy training. So, which was with FKA, Sage Institute, now Alchemy. And yeah, it was shocking and difficult because when I started seeing clients for psychedelic integration as well as for ketamine therapy, there were things that I there's no way you can prepare somebody for that. There's situations of folks having profound reenactments that were outside of dimensions of reality that I never had visited before. There were somatic releases that were sticky and gross, and I didn't have the materials for, and I had to be on the spot, and it's like improv class, like, what are we going to do? Yes. And right. And yeah, I was very much thrown into the deep end, and, tried to work with that by like just gathering all the trainings under my belt and just like seeing what one training had to say about something that another didn't. And, finding my way to Beckley and seeing just like the design of it being like kind of encompassing everything that I loved about all of those trainings, so just a plug.
I love that. And I'm so glad that you're talking about, again, what the focus of this conversation is what's happening sort of beneath the surface and in those deeper states of consciousness, right? And oftentimes, traditional education is very cognitive. It's very normal consciousness. And I think what you're touching on is that you need these other skills, right, for working with the nuance of experience. So Shirelle, you gave an introduction already as our head of growth and development, but what people may not know about you is that you're also on a journey toward becoming a therapist. And you also had the opportunity to take a few trainings yourself. So I would love to hear from your perspective, what's that all about?
Sure. And I love when Danielle goes first because I get the inspiration to be more of my full authentic self. So I'll share a little bit more of an introduction too. So yes, I'm a business leader, but I am also an artist, a meditator, a studier of yoga. I absolutely adore people and culture and languages. And I think all of those things are really a curiosity about people and these like existential questions that we tend to see arise in therapy, and then particularly in psychedelic-assisted therapy. And I guess my journey really was when I came into this field, I came primarily as a person with a business identity, but I also came because I was seeking my own healing. And so being, a student of healing in just like a personal context led me to just really come to appreciate what a paradigm shift psychedelics are in the field of like Western mental health. Psychedelics have been used for millennia in many different traditions, but in Western mental health, it was like, oh, wow, like this is a game changer. And all the research points towards this being, something that can be really impactful for folks where other modalities just haven't worked. And so that brought me to this field, and I was so curious about it. And then once, I like to say psychedelics are a gateway drug to therapy. Like once you sort of enter that realm, you just start to realize like, oh my gosh, like there's so much rich inner material here. And so that really drove me to want to become trained in psychedelic-assisted therapy, and then pursue a master's. And similar to Danielle, I also come at this from a harm reduction point of view, because I've experienced psychedelics outside of medical context for years, both as like peer support and just in recreational settings. And it's once you see someone's trauma come up in a setting that isn't really designed to hold them, like for me that was just like this like wake up where I was like, oh, I need to learn what's going on. And I really need to like understand the the ethical implications of me trying to help, because I don't exactly know what's going on for them, and I'm not sure how I'm supposed to respond and help. So it was that curiosity that led me down this path, and I'm so lucky that I've gotten to take the MAPS MDMA therapist training back when I worked at MAPS. And then now I got to be a student and a learner in Danielle's last cohort for Beckley Academy and put that hat on. And it was just a really wonderful experience.
That's beautiful. You talked a little bit about sort of this internal world, and psychedelics opening up this internal world. And one of the other things I think that it also does is it opens up these external connections outward, right? And you, like you said, you had the opportunity to take the Beckley Academy course with Danielle recently. Can you talk a little bit about that sort of outward connection aspect of it that you experienced?
Yeah, I think it's this understanding that everything that happens, it happens in relationship. And I love so much that the Beckley course focuses on this relational element. When we think about this modality, this is the first time in, the FDA and Western medicine that we're actually looking at a treatment that couples a drug and a therapy. And the therapy part is a relationship. And so being, understanding like what's going on for you in your internal system, your system of parts, if you're an internal family systems subscriber like I am, but you have a whole inner world, and all of those parts are at the table with whomever you're sitting with. And I think there's this beautiful analogy, and Danielle, you might have shared this in our class, but it's like, it's not just me, it's like me and all of my like ancestors are here in the room with this person and all of theirs and all of the relationships in their lives. And we're having this one moment together. But all that other stuff is present and it's beneath the surface. So being aware of it as a clinician helps you, right, to know where to be curious.
Yeah, and that really touches on something I'd love to ask you about, Danielle, which is what is happening beneath the surface in that therapeutic relationship? You have so much experience working with clients in ketamine-assisted therapy. Tell us, like, what are the nuances of the things that are happening there?
Yeah, I mean, there's not enough time in the world. I always think about the internal landscape is my favorite place to travel. And there's so much wider of a landscape than anything that I can experience outside of my body. And so I think one of the things that we're touching on, I love that Shirelle, like you brought this up, that like you're sitting in a room with your ancestors right at your shoulder. That's exactly what's happening, is that like, there's this activation through the relational dynamic, the emphasis on the psychedelic-assisted therapy, that there's an assistance of the therapy, there's therapy happening, and that there is an invitation or a portal or a rite of passage almost, where you are aware of your multiplicity, not your separateness, right? The greatest lie ever told is that of separation. So you're suddenly aware of your like mycelial connection to all and everything around you and of you. And that includes people and beings and non-human beings who are and inanimate beings, right? As well as ancestors that aren't people that are people that you're related to, but also people that you're not related to, and also not people, but plants, and just all of these stories, narratives, structures, cosmologies, material that has created you, and all of it's open at one point in time. And of course we have the neuroscience that's showing that that's what's happening. We have the synaptic connections just going off all at once. So all of these little doorways of access points. But to kind of talk about it in a way of like what is happening beneath the surface that we can feel is a lot of the depth of co-regulation, the depth of the somatic experience, the depth in which you are making contact with a part of somebody else from a part of you, and what new shaping or new narrative or new structure can be created because those parts are meeting. And that's difficult. When that happens, there's going to be experiences such as like transference and countertransference, right? Between you towards you and towards the client or towards the individual who's sitting. There's also ripe opportunity for reenactments because of how much our body's bones hold the trauma stories, hold the experiences in which we are demanding a different experience. And when you create a safe container that is extremely vulnerable because you're working with these medicines, then you have across from you somebody who is saying like, I have the potential to or I can tolerate, or I can be with you on the journey of creating a new experience. And their body knows that. So if the therapy has been successful so far and you have the rapport built, then that's what you're entering, and that's the offering. So yeah, always thinking about how it's not just like we're taking a pill here, we're not just like, it's not psychopharmacology in the sense that like, here's one magic bullet that's going to completely reduce the symptoms and cure your ails, but rather you're offering a completely new way of being in the world. So no big
You've really touched on something that we've thought about a lot, especially as we were creating this course, is like, how do you teach to these, the whole organization of experience, not just the mind, right? How do you teach to the body? How do you teach to what happens the moment you bring people or things together in the same space? And maybe you can speak to this a little bit, Shirelle, as a person who's recently taken the course. How did you see that happening in the course? We have practice pods, we have small group discussions, we have experientials. If you could speak a little bit to that, please.
Yeah, sure. I'd love to. I think this is where we're so lucky that Deb has a background in somatic psychotherapy education, because our program, it really teaches you on this embodied level. And, I've been lucky to do other training programs that have just been a bit more, here's a case, here's how we handled it. And like, that's great too, that does help. But when you are learning to be a clinician, it really does need to be this learning that happens internally. And for me, as somebody newer to this and newer to my therapist journey, it's like, helps me to build confidence. And so the how we did that, the way that I experienced it, is one, just the safety of the container of the cohort itself. So I really appreciated how when I would come into group discussions, like we would go through a verbal contract around safety. We did it every time. We did it with our small group as well. So we got to build trust, and building that trust on that nervous system level is what we do with our future clients as well. And so we got to practice doing that. And then with our small groups, we would also do, visualization exercises. So we opened with a mindfulness exercise here, because that's what we do in all of our, and basically everything that we do as Beckley Academy is kind of weave that through, because it's important to be able to, leave the things outside of this room and really be here, really be present, slow down. And then from that place of more slowness, more groundedness, practice with each other. I also loved that, essentially what I got to do in this course was a lot of personal work in groups. And so, being prompted to look at, some of the things that might come up for me as a future clinician, I really loved. We have a whole module on shadow work, and really trying to understand, like, as someone who's going to be in a position of power and in a healing position, what's my motivation? Like, why do I want to do this work? And I have like altruistic reasons why, and I also have reasons why that are totally personal. Like, I want to make sure that people don't leave me. Like, having to go through that, having to share it here, right? Like, that's really important work for us to do as clinicians, and feeling safe to do it is what is, I think, one of the magic pieces of our cohorts.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that. And one of the things that sort of came up as you were talking was, and you all may not know this, is that our course is entirely online. And so I guess a follow-up question to that for you, Shirelle, is like, what was that online learning experience like for you?
Yeah, it was fantastic. I really, I spend a lot of my days in Zoom meetings. So I have the experience sometimes of being like Zoom fatigued. And what I found is when I would come to class, it actually energized me. And I think that's because of the focus on connection. And the connection really happened, in our small groups, but also in our big group discussions. And Danielle's an amazing facilitator, but our group discussions were always engaging. I was never sitting there like listening to a lecture that I was zoning out of. And that takes a lot of design work. So I really appreciate that was something that we could do in this class. And then I personally loved the asynchronous pieces as well, because a lot of that was journaling, visualization, encouragement to go on mindfulness-based walks, things like that. And that actually was a wonderful reminder to kind of do some of that self-care and self-work that I might not normally schedule into my everyday life, even though I aspire to do that.
And Danielle, I'd love to hear from your perspective as a faculty, what's it like teaching a course like this that does go really deep into experience online?
It's been scrumptious. That's the word that's coming up for me. The scrumptiousness being, I think Shirelle's capturing this a bit, but the somatic design, the decolonial design, the way in which the design is more akin to somebody being in therapy than it is somebody being in school, which is really hard to capture, right? So I could feel the shaping of all learners kind of having this like deeply reflective experience, almost as if they were in like group therapy with each other, not that they were like sitting in like Shirelle said, a lecture hall. And yeah, so I think it was easy for me to almost have worry that like, oh, this is another online program, like what is it? How is this going to be different? But what I found was that it really allowed us to have an extremely diverse group of learners from all over the world, which was really rich to be able to learn from each other in that way. Because then you have individuals who are, we have like folks who are like moving mental health professionals or moving towards becoming mental health professionals, or like other body workers or somatic workers, or acupuncturists, nurses, doctors. We had that. And we also had ceremonialists, indigenous ceremonial leaders. And they wouldn't have been able to do this together if we would have done something in person. It would be awesome to do it in person. It would totally change the structure. And then the asynchronous piece of it being like very like learner led, allowing individuals to have a very full life, because ultimately it being on Thursday morning Pacific time, we definitely had to deal with time zones, meant that, we had folks who had kids, and folks who were working full time, very passionate, beautiful worlds, also in school for other things. And it was doable. It wasn't demanding too much. And when they did have homework, the homework was like, go have a mindfulness moment with a plant. It's like that kind of stuff, and report back, which is really sweet. Like find a ritual object. It's really cute. So
thank you. And you've both touched on this a little bit, but one of the parallels we think about often is how learning really is about a transformation, and therapy is about a transformation. There's this parallel here. I think, Shirelle, I'd like to hear from you about what that transformation was like for you, and in relationship to what we've been talking about, what Danielle's been talking about really needing to understand what's below the surface and what's happening for you and your system, as well as for the client.
Yeah, thank you, Deb. Transformation. I think one of the big things that I've taken away from learning about learning as an educator is that all learning is transformation. And going through our course was a truly a transformative experience. And I entered our course as kind of like a newish graduate student. I've had some psychedelic training, some peer support. It's not new to me. Like psychedelics and psychedelic spaces are not new to me. But all of a sudden I was like, oh, I'm actually on a journey to become a psychedelic therapist. And it's like, it finally hit. And I think it's because we did so much of that embodiment work and so much of that practice on this level that is beneath the surface. And so throughout the course, that identity was starting to grow and take shape. But what I loved is that we did a cacao ceremony that's over the course of 3 days. And if you check out our schedules for the fall, you'll notice this 3-day time block. And that ceremony itself, being invited into taking a heart opening medicine, doing it in a container where I had a lot of support with my Communitas pod, where we were practicing, it was like that moment. I was like, oh yeah, I have a new identity emerging. And as we were talking about this idea of transformation and integration in the class, it's like those things were happening for me. So it's a really beautiful experience. And I think, now I feel at the end of this course, even though I'm first year grad student, I'm like, okay, like I actually feel prepared to like go into an internship, go into a practicum now, because I feel more prepared than what grad school is probably going to do for me, because I actually have had a lot more practice and witnessing. I got to witness a lot of other people's transformations too. And we learn from each other as much as, we learn from, the course materials.
That's beautiful. And one of the things I'm curious about is sort of the emotional experiences. So one of the things that we've talked about before and that we've, is happening beneath the surface is really the all of the opportunity, right, for really deep emotion to emerge during a PAD experience. Can you talk a little bit about the emotional aspect of the course as you experienced it and how it sort of helped you, one, sort of feel into all those deep emotions and or hold space for it?
Yeah, absolutely. I think when you go into when you approach the field of psychedelics and psychedelic therapy and therapy in general, right, like you're going to have experiences of grief and sadness, and those themes definitely came up in the course and in the journey and doing the self work, and at the same time, experiences of like hopefulness and joy as well. I loved in our integration module, we talked about the grief that comes with any transformation, because you are shedding, you're leaving things behind. And so in my personal experience, even being in the course, I'm like, oh yeah, there are parts of, as this new part arises, I'm also letting go of things. And a lot of that emotion came up, and we got to work through that with our pod. Memories arose for each of us as well. Even just things happening in our day to day. So just being able to come and talk about those emotions in that space, and then practice with them, it was really helpful. I feel like personally, like a lot moved for me in the course of the 4, 5, 6 months that we were in our cohort together.
Kind of moves well into this next question, which is for you, Danielle, and this will be where we stop this kind of portion of it before we go into Q&A, is we know that trauma happens in relationship, and we know that healing happens in relationship. We also know that learning happens in relationship. And I would love if you would just speak to your experiences of how that kind of deep connection can really lead toward healing.
Oh, that's my favorite. Yeah. Yeah. Oh my gosh. I mean, I'm like literally having these like flashback moments of just our last cohort where, oh my gosh, I mean, what we would do is the team would stay on for like after class for like 15 minutes, just to like, if anybody had any questions or stuff was still processing. I was also holding office hours. And some of the material that would come up in those spaces was really powerful, because we were watching learners kind of move through their own realizations of like their own insights about their lives. And, after, like, I think somebody I have in mind is like maybe 40, 50 years old, something like that. And, she really accessed some like deep insight of her story. And it's hard to describe, but like, it almost feels like the relationship, the rapport that we were able to bring, because we're using these psychotherapy, like this psychotherapy knowledge of how trust really works and how co-regulation really works and how safety really works, and use that for learning. Then you have like, I don't know, the image is almost like the heart is a cave, and suddenly that cave is open because there's like an expansiveness, and you're like, oh wait, no, this is the way this works, or what I thought was possible, or consciousness is like expanding beyond what I thought previously possible. So that openness then means that like there's the realm of possibility is just so large, right? And like when you can stay in relationship to that and you're just like nourishing it and nurturing it and tending to it and then saying here's a bunch of material that like can actually really contribute to you, you know, meeting somebody in a way in which they get to alchemize, you know, it's that's really beautiful. And I don't know if any of that makes sense, because so much of this is like, it's so poetic, it's so metaphorical, it's so symbolic, but these are the realms that we're working in. And I don't know, it's kind of one of those ones where I'm like it's like, if you know, you know, and I can't wait to show you, you know.
Final thoughts, if there's any one thing that you could tell people who are considering taking training in psychedelic assisted therapy, you know, what's the top thing? What's the top consideration? What's, you know, what advice do you have for them?
I don't know if this is advice, but I'm just going to tell you the things that I tell Uber drivers when they ask me what I do. It just reflections on that is that, like, you know, honestly, I'm just going to tell you this, which is, so if you ask, I'll tell Uber, literally tell Uber drivers this, if you ask anybody you know, ever, like, what was the most significant moment that you had in your past year? And like, let them think about it for a moment. Usually what they'll come up with was a moment or a couple moments where they deeply connected with another human being. Okay. I do that 8 times a day. Like, it's a lot. And my life is so full, and my gratitude is dripping like honey, like down my body at all points in time. But to honor the sacredness of being able to do this work, it's not easy. And it requires a lot of attention, but wow. If you're interested, if you have like a little call here, maybe you don't end up doing specifically psychedelic assisted therapy, right? But like, this type of material will help you connect to the people that you love in a way that, like, I didn't even know you could love like that, you know? So, and now I'm on a crusade towards people like that. So,
okay. So Shirelle, Danielle, thank you so much for that conversation. That was awesome. We're going to move into the next portion, which I think you'll share some slides, Shirelle. Yeah.
Great. So coming up, we have our fall cohorts of psychedelic assisted therapy, our class. There's a little bit more about the class format here. So it's 76 credit hours. As we've mentioned in this conversation, it's a combination of prep work that you do ahead of time, you know, asynchronously on your own time, and then coming together for Zoom sessions, group work, and work with your Communitas pod, your kind of small group. And it's a 21-week program, and our fall cohorts begin on October 9th. Deb, I'll hand it to you for the next couple of slides.
Thank you.
Scroll down. Sorry, there you go.
So some of the theories and methodologies, we've talked a little about these through this conversation, but so we've got a combination of psychological approaches, educational approaches, and then we've highlighted some of our featured theorists and thought leaders. So in terms of psychological approaches, we're really looking at psychoanalytical, psychodynamic, somatic, and transpersonal theories to inform our course. In terms of educational theories, we're learner-centered, very much a constructivist classroom, which means you're co-creating learning material together. You know, we know that you are all folks who come with your own experiences and your own knowledge, and we really want to honor that and really create together a learning experience that, you know, honors that, but also meets your needs. It's embodied and also relational, as we talked about. Some of the featured theorists, so we've got Groff, Carl Jung, Janice Phelps, Kylie Taylor, Amanda Fielding's work with Beckley Foundation, of course, as well. And then in terms of course content, this is an overview. So it's 6 modules with an orientation, so 7 modules. Each one is 3 weeks long. It begins with some asynchronous self-paced work in that first week where you're looking at materials, deepening into some of the theories, doing some self-practice sort of work. The second week of each module, everyone comes together in the large group. You really put those theories and information to practice together. And then in the third week, you're meeting with small groups to really deepen into some of those and also continue practicing. And so in the orientation, we introduce concepts, basic concepts, so communitas, liminality, somatic resourcing, a little bit about the nervous system and the role of that in regulation and co-regulation, psychedelic-assisted therapy competencies, and we start creating that container. In the second module, we're really starting to introduce the ethics of care, right relationship. In the first module. In the second module, indigenous uses of psychedelics, ceremony, various power dynamics that are at play, as well as belief systems. Module 3, we dive into contemporary research and use of psychedelics, but also the limitations of research and some of the historical harms of research as well. So we're really looking at sort of the medical model and what that means in terms of psychedelics. In the fourth module, we dive deeper into ethics. So we're really looking at what's happening below that surface that we've spent a lot of time talking about here. So we're looking at transference, countertransference, shadow work, starting to practice those skills for deepening into experience as well with each other. Module 5 is where the cacao experience happens. And module 5 is really about all of the stages of the therapeutic process. So preparation, holding space, transformation, and integration. And then finally, we finish up with module 6, which is about a community of practice, clinical applications, closing the container, all those emotions we talked about that come up with closings and with transformations are also featured in that last and final module. We have a number of contributors. This is not even all of them, but you might recognize some of their faces. They have all contributed to this course, either through consultation or creating videos or writing content. And I think that is it. We have a couple minutes. We have about 5 minutes we can stay if you've got course-specific questions, enrollment questions, or anything like that.
And I also wanted to, Kabir and I will both drop a link into the chat to schedule time with us on a one-on-one basis. So Kabir, I might ask you to just unmute and say a quick hi and what you help folks with during the application process.
Certainly. Hi to everyone. My name is Kabir. I work at the Beckley Academy as the manager of learner experience. So if you do end up taking any of our courses, you'll get to know me super well. I help folks navigate the courses, make sure their experience is as great as we can possibly make it, and help folks through the onboarding process. If you have questions about applying, anything related to the application process, or questions about the course format, I'm here to answer any of those questions. And as Shirelle mentioned, we both are available to talk over Zoom. We have plenty of time on our calendars to schedule 30-minute conversations if you want a more personal one-on-one conversation about the courses.